The U.S. government is not just talking about cracking down on cartel influence and drug trafficking at the border, it's considering taking the fight directly into Mexico. Whispers of a special forces invasion have ignited a geopolitical firestorm, and at the center of it all, none other than tech billionaire Elon Musk, a wildcard in a high-stakes battle that could change the tides of the U.S.-Mexico relations. Elon Musk prepares for U.S.'s war against cartels. Elon Musk, the billionaire behind Tesla and SpaceX, is back in the spotlight, and this time for calling out the U.S. military's outdated strategies, especially with the brewing war against the Mexican cartel. Musk, who has been a major player in American politics, especially since the start of Trump's presidency, is raising alarms about the future of U.S. defense tech and whether it can keep up on the global stage. His latest comments have rattled the defense community. He argues that the U.S. is stuck producing a handful of insanely expensive weapons instead of adapting to modern warfare. In his words, America is prepping for yesterday's battles, not tomorrow's wars. And if things don't change fast, he warns, the U.S. could end up losing the next big conflict. One of Musk's biggest critiques, the F-35 fighter jet program. He didn't sugarcoat it, calling its builders idiots and pushing for a shift toward drones. According to Musk, piloted fighter jets are becoming obsolete, while drones offer a cheaper, smarter, and more flexible alternative. His take has ignited a fierce debate among military experts. Some agree, saying drones are the future of warfare. Others argue the F-35 is still one of the most advanced aircraft in the world, and that drones can't fully replace human pilots. Of course, not everyone's on board. Musk's bold ideas and blunt statements have sparked plenty of controversy. Supporters see him as a visionary pushing for much-needed reform, while critics question whether his proposals are realistic or even safe. Musk's warning is very timely given how the U.S. has dispatched flying covert drones into Mexico to spy on cartel operations. Under orders from President Donald Trump, MQ-9 Reaper drones have been slipping into Mexican airspace, tracking down the infamous drug cartels that have long terrorized the region. This covert mission signals a major shift in how the U.S. is handling national security, treating these cartels more like terrorist organizations than criminal enterprises. For now, the MQ-9 Reapers are unarmed, but that could change in an instant. These drones are built for precision strikes, and the U.S. has used them to take out high-profile targets in war zones like Syria, Iraq, and Somalia. This isn't the first time U.S. surveillance drones have hovered over Mexico. Past operations have worked with Mexican authorities to track cartel movements. But this latest mission, it's different. It's more aggressive. Congress got a special classified notice about the flights, a sign that the Trump administration wanted to keep the operation under wraps. What's even more telling, that notification made no mention of Mexico's involvement, implying the U.S. is running this show solo. When pressed about the mission, the CIA kept it vague. A spokesperson dodged specifics, but did confirm that fighting drug cartels is a priority. Meanwhile, CIA Director John Ratcliffe is reportedly pushing to use the agency's full force to dismantle cartel networks, treating them as a national security threat on par with terrorist cells. But the secret's out, and tensions are rising. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum and top officials aren't thrilled about American spy planes operating near their borders. Defense Minister Ricardo Trevilla admitted surprise at the increased U.S. surveillance flights, noting that while they technically hadn't crossed into Mexico, the potential for espionage was real. What they haven't publicly addressed, however, is the fact that the CIA's MQ-9 drones have been flying in Mexican airspace. President Sheinbaum has made it clear that if the U.S. is running operations in or near Mexico, they'd better start sharing intel. Transparency and cooperation, she insists, are key. But despite her calls for openness, the CIA's drone program continues in the shadows. They don't officially acknowledge its existence, though anyone on the ground might hear the unmistakable hum of a Reaper overhead. Trump has never been shy about using military force against cartels. Back in 2019, he made it clear that he was ready to wage war on them, arguing that their size and firepower rivals some small armies. And he's not alone. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, a longtime advocate for aggressive action, co-sponsored legislation that would authorize military force against the cartels. For now, the CIA's drones remain unarmed, the cartels remain powerful, and the debate over military intervention is still raging. But one thing is clear, the U.S. is escalating its fight against the cartels, and whether through intelligence ops, drone strikes, or outright war, the battle is far from over. If we take a second look at it, direct military intervention against the cartels may not be the answer to ending the drug trafficking crisis. The idea of unleashing U.S. military firepower on Mexican cartels might sound like a hardline solution, but in reality, it's a logistical, political, and financial nightmare waiting to happen. These cartels aren't just street gangs. They operate like paramilitary forces, armed to the teeth, flush with cash, and plugged into global supply chains that stretch from Latin America to China. Their influence seeps into the U.S., making them formidable enemies with the resources to strike back. And if history has taught us anything, it's that they will retaliate. Take Felipe Calderón's 2006 War on Drugs as Exhibit A. The moment he deployed military forces against the cartels, violence exploded. The cartels didn't just take it on the chin, they fought back hard, targeting police, soldiers, and government officials. The streets ran red, and Mexico found itself trapped in an unrelenting cycle of bloodshed. Or look at October 2019, when Mexican forces tried to arrest Ovidio Guzman Lopez, son of the infamous El Chapo. The result? The Battle of Culiacan, a full-blown cartel siege that left authorities outgunned and outmaneuvered, forcing them to release Guzman just to restore order. That moment sent a chilling message. These cartels don't just have firepower, they have strategy, discipline, and the ability to turn a city into a war zone overnight. Now imagine what happens if the U.S. directly steps into the ring. The cartels already have extensive networks operating stateside, running everything from drug distribution to underground banking operations with Chinese financial networks. If pushed, they could escalate. Think high-profile assassinations, attacks on law enforcement, or even cyber strikes aimed at disrupting critical infrastructure. Cartel-linked gangs within the U.S. provide the perfect channels for such retaliation. Beyond physical threats, these organizations are smart enough to wage war in less obvious ways. Their financial power allows them to manipulate local politics and law enforcement through bribery and intimidation. Their growing cyber capabilities mean they could dig up information on political figures, law enforcement leaders, or military personnel, turning intelligence into a weapon. Then there's the political mess. Mexico's government, already struggling with corruption and cartel infiltration, could face a crisis of legitimacy. Even if President Claudia Sheinbaum's administration agreed to some level of U.S. involvement, full-scale military intervention would be seen as an outright violation of Mexican sovereignty. This wouldn't just sour U.S.-Mexico relations, it could spark outrage across Latin America, with other nations viewing the move as imperial overreach. And let's not forget, if the U.S. sets a precedent for military intervention against criminal organizations, other countries might start justifying their own armed incursions under similar pretenses. If the U.S. is serious about taking on the cartels militarily, it can't go in blind. A successful campaign has to involve a strong partnership with the new Mexican administration under President Claudia Sheinbaum. That means joint task forces, deeper intelligence sharing, and specialized military training for Mexican forces. More importantly, it means tackling the corruption that has long allowed cartels to thrive. Without fixing that, any military push would be like trying to mop up a flood while the faucet's still running. Back home, Washington needs to brace for potential blowback. Agencies like the DEA, FBI, and Homeland Security must ramp up coordination, not just to track cartel movements, but to preempt potential threats. Cracking down on cartel-affiliated gangs in the U.S. is just as crucial as hitting their bases in Mexico. Cybersecurity efforts also need reinforcement. Cartel-led hacking is a very real possibility. And let's talk about the elephant in the room, the demand for drugs. U.S. drug consumption is what fuels the cartels in the first place.
The Sinaloa cartel supplies most of the fentanyl in the U.S. and is largely responsible for more than 100,000 overdose deaths in 2021 alone.
While law enforcement agencies have made significant strides in detection technology, drug traffickers have also adapted and evolved.
Here's an example of what we're getting in tires. So they'll get 4 of these together to make a circle, bolt them around the rim of the tire.
They utilize advanced concealment methods, such as hidden compartments in vehicles and sophisticated smuggling techniques to evade detection.
Where we've had to completely disassemble engines to get to packages of narcotics. With the engine running.
Without addressing addiction, supply chains will simply rewire themselves. Investing in treatment programs and public education isn't just about health, it's a national security move. Similarly, supporting economic opportunities in Mexico gives people an alternative to cartel life, weakening the recruiting pipeline. Deploying U.S. Special Forces against the cartels is a tempting option, but history warns against underestimating these transnational criminal empires. A heavy-handed military approach without airtight planning and deep cooperation with Mexico risks setting off a chain reaction of violence that could spill onto U.S. soil, destabilize border regions, and stretch law enforcement thin. A smarter strategy: combine military pressure with ironclad partnerships, domestic security reinforcements, and economic interventions that cut off cartel power at its source. Because if the U.S. is serious about this fight, it's got to play the long game. While the military might be a tool, solving the cartel crisis demands a smarter, multi-pronged strategy, one that tackles tackles corruption, strengthens Mexico's law enforcement, disrupts cartel finances, and most importantly, addresses the real fuel behind this crisis, U.S. drug demand. Because at the end of the day, if the market stays alive, so will the cartels. The talks about how U.S. military's war against the cartels may prove very dangerous is not just an attempt to overestimate the cartel's influence over the drug trade. There has been an ongoing war against the cartel by the Mexican government. Mexico's war against cartels. Mexico's decades-long war against the cartels is proof that brute force alone won't cut it. From Calderon's full-throttle military crackdown to AMLO's attempt at a softer, socio-economic approach, every administration has tried to rewrite the playbook. Yet the cartels remain undefeated, more ruthless, more sophisticated, and more deeply embedded in Mexico's economy and government than ever before. The harsh reality is that cartels have evolved into something far beyond criminal syndicates. They function as shadow governments, complete with military-grade arsenals, intelligence networks, and economic dominance in regions where the state barely holds influence. In some areas, cartels offer social services, impose their own forms of justice, and pay better than the legitimate job market. With their deep pockets and an endless supply of foot soldiers, they've outlasted every decisive military campaign waged against them. One of the biggest missteps in Mexico's war on cartels was the over-reliance on the kingpin strategy, a tactic that focuses on taking down cartel leaders. Governments hope that removing top bosses like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and Arturo Beltran Leyva would destabilize their organizations, leading to collapse. Instead, it had the opposite effect. The fall of a leader often triggered violent internal power struggles, splitting cartels into warring factions. The result was more bloodshed, more unpredictability, and a battlefield filled with smaller, more aggressive criminal groups. The Gulf Cartel, once a single powerful entity, fragmented into brutal turf wars between its splinter factions, each trying to dominate the remnants of its empire. The same happened with the Beltran Leyva organization, which fractured into multiple competing groups after its leaders were eliminated. The more the government dismantled cartels, the more the underworld fractured into violent, uncontrollable chaos. Modern cartels are no longer just about drugs. While cocaine, heroin, and fentanyl still rake in billions, today's cartels have diversified into human trafficking, oil theft, extortion, illegal mining, and cybercrime. Some factions now resemble insurgent groups more than drug traffickers, openly challenging the Mexican government for territorial control. Los Zetas pioneered the militarization of cartel warfare, employing ex-special forces to train their foot soldiers and turning Mexico's highways into war zones. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or CJNG, has taken things a step further, using armored convoys, explosive drones, and social media propaganda to flex its power. In some parts of Mexico, CJNG is feared more than the police or military. Corruption is the lifeblood of the cartels, the invisible force that keeps their empires intact despite relentless crackdowns. Behind every dramatic arrest, every high-profile cartel takedown, there is a network of politicians, police officers, and military officials ensuring that the machinery of narco-trafficking never truly stops. The cartels don't just infiltrate the system, they are the system. Listen to this conversation between El Mencho, the leader of the CJNG cartel, and a Delta One cop who had arrested some of his men.
Delta Uno. Hey, ¿quién habla? Mira bien, hijo de tu puta madre. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tu puta gente a la verga. Soy Mencho, güey. Relaja tus putas partidas. Si no te voy a partir tu madre, tienes toda tu bola de perros. Te tengo identificado 30 güeyes. Hasta tus putos perros te voy a matar si no te relajas, güey.
This conversation is perfect evidence of how the CJNG controls the police. The illusion of cartel power is carefully maintained by public officials who have far more to gain from cooperation than from resistance. When local police forces conveniently fail to show up before a major cartel operation, when a key witness mysteriously disappears, or when entire criminal cases collapse due to lack of evidence, it's not incompetence, it's strategy. Corrupt officials are the unseen architects of the cartel's survival, ensuring that while some faces at the top may change, the business itself continues uninterrupted. Even the military, often presented as Mexico's last line of defense against organized crime, is deeply entangled in this web of corruption. Soldiers are deployed to cartel strongholds, not to dismantle operations, but to negotiate power dynamics. When the Sinaloa cartel forced the release of Ovidio Guzman in Culiacan, it wasn't just an example of cartel influence. It was a glimpse into the state's willingness to yield under pressure. border. The official excuse was civilian safety, but the underlying message was clear. The government is not always in control. The judicial system offers little hope for justice. Prosecutors and judges, faced with either a bribe or a bullet, often make the pragmatic choice. Cartel-linked defendants walk free, while journalists exposing corruption are silenced. Those in power know that confronting the cartels head-on is a losing game, not just because of the cartel's firepower, but because the entire political structure is built to accommodate them. For all the dramatic stories of cartel kingpins and bloody turf wars, the real story of Mexico's drug trade is far more insidious. The cartels are not just criminal organizations. They are the product of a system that has, for generations, allowed corruption to thrive. As long as that system remains intact, no amount of military intervention, no wave of high-profile arrests, and no political promises will be enough to break the cycle. At this point, it's clear that Mexico's military alone cannot defeat the cartels. Corruption runs deep within law enforcement and government institutions, hampering efforts to dismantle the cartel's networks. Bribes, threats, and outright assassinations ensure that anyone who resists cartel influence doesn't last long. Even elite military units have been compromised, with soldiers defecting to join cartel militias for better pay. In cartel strongholds like Michoacan, Guerrero, and Sinaloa, criminal organizations have home field advantage. They know the terrain better than government forces and have local support, either through fear or financial incentives, making it difficult for the military to operate effectively. Looking at how Mexico's military war against the cartel has been ineffective, the U.S. government has signed a new executive order against the cartel, which may be more effective than using military force. Foreign terrorist organization.
This port of entry sees more fentanyl than any other port of entry in the U.S. In fact, over half of it is interdicted here. And the problem just keeps growing and growing and growing. In the first 6 months of 2023, officers have seized more fentanyl than they had in the last 5 years combined.
The Trump administration's move to label 8 cartels as terrorist organizations marks a major change in how the U.S. tackles organized crime. This decision follows a series of events that show how these cartels have grown in power and influence, not just in Mexico, but worldwide. Over time, these groups, like the notorious Sinaloa and Jalisco New Generation cartels, have expanded their operations, even making their presence known in the U.S. By the time Trump took office in 2017, the focus on border security and crime reduction was at the forefront of his administration's goals. The Department of Justice, led by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, ramped up efforts to take down these criminal organizations, with arrests and seizures. But the cartels proved tough to beat, adapting quickly to changing tactics, which led the government to consider more aggressive options. By 2019, it became clear that a more comprehensive strategy was needed. The idea of officially designating these cartels as terrorist organizations was pushed forward. This move would give the U.S. more tools to fight back, like freezing assets, increasing surveillance, and working with international partners to break down these powerful networks. With Donald Trump back in the White House, the dynamics between the two countries have shifted dramatically. His administration's moves are seen as bold political gestures, aimed at reinforcing his campaign promises and projecting strength on both the domestic and global stage. The surprise capture of Ismael El Mayo Zambada, a notorious figure in organized crime, under the cover of night last July, serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing war against drug cartels. This high-profile operation has fueled tensions, especially considering the Biden administration's past frustrations with the effectiveness of anti-crime efforts. The reasoning behind this decision is multi-layered. First, the cartels fit the criteria for terrorist organizations, as they use violence and intimidation to control territory and push their agenda. Their operations go beyond just drugs, including human trafficking, arms smuggling, and money laundering, all of which threaten national security and public safety. Second, this designation aims to disrupt the cartel's financial operations. By freezing assets and targeting financial transactions, the U.S. wants to cripple their ability to fund criminal activities, just like it has done with other terrorist groups, such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Additionally, it sends a strong message to anyone thinking about working with these cartels. There will be serious consequences. This designation also boosts global cooperation, encouraging other countries to take similar actions to fight these networks. On the political front, this designation could shift how the media covers terrorism at the border. Even though there has never been a terrorist attack at the U.S. border, the administration's move to label cartel violence as terrorism makes those fears feel more real, even if it's only on the surface. This reframing of cartel-related violence could create the illusion of a surge in terrorism along the border, further solidifying the administration's stance on border security. The move also has implications for immigration policy. By designating designating cartels as FTOs, the administration could impose harsher penalties on immigrants who cross the border illegally, especially those who hire smugglers associated with the cartels. Giving money to these organizations could result in criminal charges for material support of terrorism, which seems out of sync with the intent of lawmakers. However, it fits neatly with the administration's tougher stance on immigration. Asylum seekers could be hit particularly hard by this decision. The Trump administration has already taken steps to limit asylum claims at the border, and labeling cartels as FTOs provides further justification to reject those claims. Immigrants who fear persecution but have crossed paths with cartels could be denied asylum, as giving material support to terrorist organizations bars them from receiving refuge in the U.S. The new designation also allows the administration to use anti-terrorism laws to freeze assets, prosecute smugglers, and carry out counter-terrorism operations. Terrorism offenses come with harsher penalties than drug-related crimes, and this could lead to stricter regulatory compliance requirements, making it harder for cartels to access the financial system. Essentially, this shift lowers the threshold for counter-terrorism operations compared to traditional law enforcement methods used against cartels. As the U.S. strengthens its military presence along the border, Mexico finds itself in a delicate position. The Mexican government, under President Claudia Sheinbaum, has opted for a cautious approach when dealing with Trump's unpredictable leadership. When it came to light that U.S. aircraft were conducting surveillance near the Baja California Peninsula and Sinaloa's coasts, Mexico's response was measured. Secretary of Defense General Ricardo Trevilla initially expressed uncertainty about the aircraft's intentions, but confirmed they were complying with international regulations. The focus remains on maintaining communication with U.S. Northern Command, with both sides keeping discussions cordial. However, the issue of territorial sovereignty remains sensitive, especially following the Trump administration's decision to label Mexican drug cartels as terrorist organizations. This move raises concerns about potential U.S. interference within Mexican borders, though the situation remains shrouded in uncertainty. The U.S. mission is clear: gather intelligence on drug cartels and develop strategies to curb their operations. With approval from the Department of Defense, these surveillance flights have increased, with the information shared with Mexico to help tackle the violence fueled by drug trafficking, particularly fentanyl. Even with Mexico's perceived cooperation with the U.S., Mexico's president has ramped up tensions with the U.S., threatening legal action against American gun makers if Washington goes ahead with labeling Mexican cartels as terrorist organizations. This move is stirring the pot in an already tense relationship between the two countries.
At the same time, I explained the gravity of the number of high-powered firearms illegally coming into Mexico from the U.S. These high-powered weapons empower criminal groups and give them firepower. We also ask the U.S. to help prevent arms trafficking from their country into ours.
If the U.S. designates these cartels as terrorist groups, U.S. gun manufacturers could face new lawsuits and be labeled as accomplices in the violence that's been wreaking havoc in Mexico. The situation is complicated by both international relations and domestic pressures. While President Donald Trump has been vocal about Mexico needing to do more to stop illegal drug trafficking into the U.S., Mexico is demanding accountability from its northern neighbor for the firearms smuggling that fuels the violence south of the border. The stakes are high, and the fallout could be significant. The U.S. Justice Department itself has acknowledged that 74% of the weapons used by criminal groups in Mexico come from the United States. This only adds to the weight of Mexico's claim, underlining the deep connection between U.S. gun makers and the violence that has claimed thousands of lives across the border. The numbers are alarming. Mexico reports that every year, between 200,000 and 750,000 firearms made by U.S. manufacturers are smuggled across the border. Many of these weapons are later found at crime scenes, contributing to the violence that's been spiraling out of control. Since Mexico deployed its military in 2006 to combat drug trafficking, around 480,000 people have lost their lives to drug-related violence. These shocking statistics point to the urgent need to stop the illegal flow of firearms. In August, a U.S. judge dismissed a $10 billion lawsuit Mexico had filed against 6 American gun manufacturers. The case was thrown out due to lack of jurisdiction, but Mexico has vowed to continue its legal fight against 2 companies, Smith & Wesson and Interstate Arms. In Arizona, another lawsuit is pushing for sanctions against dealers who sold guns that were later used in crimes along the border. These legal battles show that Mexico is determined to hold U.S. gun makers responsible for their role in the violence. Mexico has strict firearm regulations that make it nearly impossible to legally obtain guns within the country, but the flow of smuggled weapons continues to fuel the violence. President Sheinbaum has rejected U.S. accusations that her government has ties ties with drug cartels, blasting them on social media and claiming that if any alliances exist, it's between U.S. gun shops and criminal organizations. The relationship between the two countries is at a boiling point. Recently, the White House announced plans to impose a 25% tariff on goods from Mexico and Canada due to issues surrounding illegal immigration and drug smuggling. Though these tariffs have been put on hold for now, the threat continues to loom over an already fragile diplomatic relationship. As this drama plays out, the stakes are enormous for both nations. If U.S. cartels are officially designated as terrorist groups, it could alter international law and trade in unprecedented ways. For U.S. gun makers, the fear of being labeled as terrorist accomplices is a nightmare scenario that could have a disastrous impact on the industry. In this tense political standoff, the outcome is still unclear, and all eyes are on how it unfolds. Click on one of the cards on our screen to see more videos like this.